Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now that the roses, the shrub roses anyway, have finished flowering, it's a good time to do some pruning. One tends to think of rose pruning as something that happens in winter, and you can prune roses in winter, and often it's easier to see when all the foliage has dropped. But actually, these shrub roses, the gallicas, the albas, the damas, produce their flowers on the previous year's growth. So if we just neaten them up slightly, taking off these long shoots that either are out of proportion with the rest of the shrub, or maybe so long that there's a risk of them rocking in winter winds, just trim them back. Just take them back. Don't worry too much about where you cut or what angle you cut or anything like that. These are tough plants. I often prune roses with a pair of shears, and they're perfectly good. Now, coming up on today's programme, Arit visits a brownfield site that has been transformed into a beautiful wildlife garden.
It's not just the stuff on top, but there's lots of things going on underneath as well.
OK, I'm intrigued to find out more about that.
We meet a gardener who has created his very own Japanese garden in the middle of Bristol.
When I walk through my garden, it fills me with pleasure, happiness, and it puts a smile on my face.
And Rachel visits the garden of hairstylist to the stars, Sam McKnight, and discovers his love of packing borders with floral joy.
This is definitely me in plant form, and it gets more and more me as the seasons go on.
It seems like the flowers really are the stars for you.
That's what shouts at me, and that's what I respond to. I mean, look at that. I mean, it's extraordinary.
And I'll be adding to the borders that I made last year on the mound. Pruning shrub roses, like those in the cottage garden, is actually very straightforward, and if in doubt and you do nothing, you'll do no harm at all. Now, this is a rambling rose, and you can see it's generating this new growth. You can see here, this is a typical rambling growth. It's slender and arching, and you can see this growth coming down here, and because it's young, it's yet to go up into the tree. But I've got them growing up in some of the bigger trees here in the orchard, and they sprawl up into the trees and arch and look magnificent. And quite frankly, the best thing to do is leave them to it. Don't try and prune them. However, I have got a rambler growing over a shed, which does need quite a lot of pruning. On the side of this shed, I've got this rambler, Felicity Perpetuae. It's quite a vigorous rambler. And the intention was to grow up, cover the roof of the writing shed, and then go on up into the trees. And that would have looked wonderful. But you can see, look at the way it's growing. It's going as far away from the trees as it possibly can. And that's because there's no light. So I want to prune it back, partly to size and partly so we get the best of it next year. Now, before I do that, I've actually got to hand a bit of protection, because this is a prickly one. Now you can see here, this nice green shoot, that's going to be next year's flowers. And what you try and do with a rambler is have a number, maybe 5 or 6 really strong shoots from the base of the plant. And that means if you want to prune an old one out, you need to do it right down at the bottom, not like a climber, where you're getting this network on the side of the wall. Whoa. Now, this seems a bit drastic, but actually folding a rambler down from a wall or a fence or a trellis makes perfectly good sense. And then I can cut out the old wood and then put the new whippy growth back up and tie it in. So what we're left with is a much reduced structure, but consisting almost entirely of new vigorous growth that will carry next year's flowers, we hope. There we go. There we go. If you can, if you're training against a fence or a roof or even a tree, if you can get them to splay so they're all moving in some kind of diagonal direction, they will flower much better. We now have a very simple structure of nice new whippy growth that will carry side shoots and will have flowers next summer. And believe you me, this is a vigorous rambler. This will cover that roof easily by next June. And if I had pruned it regularly, there would be no need to be so radical. Now, it's time to join Arit, because a couple of months ago, she went down to visit a garden just outside Bath that has been made on the site of a reclaimed industrial wasteland.
Would you create a garden on an industrial waste site, impoverished soil and loads of rubbish? Most of us would probably run a mile, but garden designer Jo McCurr stood her desolate ground and wow, look at this. This 2.5-acre garden has a pond, gravel garden, herbaceous border, but its centrepiece is swathes of wildflower meadow. Jo, this is stunning.
Thank you so much. I hope you can see sort of the diversity, the life that's in it as well.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's what I'm kind of looking around the whole time. Of course, there's the beautiful flowers, but there's things darting up and down in front of me as well. So it feels really alive, but equally, I feel really calm.
It's not just the stuff on top, but there's lots of things going on underneath as well.
OK. I'm intrigued to find out more about that. What do you mean by what's going on underneath?
Well, the site's got a really interesting post-industrial history. It was a brownfield site, so that's the Somerset Coal Canal tunnel. So the canal used to run through here,
Wow.
bringing coal. And then we had the Somerset and Dorset Railway take over, and I have a railway line running through it. So the place has been mauled and scarred by industry. So when I came here, it's sort of been taken over by wilderness.
Right.
And I thought initially, great, it's a blank canvas, I can sort of do my garden design wonders on it. But far from it, it wasn't blank canvas at all. I hadn't realised at the time brownfield sites are really, really precious resources for quite rare wildlife, bats, birds, insects. And I started finding things here. And so instead of doing an immediate overhaul of the place, I unpicked it gradually and I had to build different habitats. I tried to enhance what was here rather than deplete it and try and give things what they needed.
With her slow gardening approach, Jo took 4 years to observe the wildlife before she even put a foot to the spade. I love these steps, Jo.
Thank you, yeah. They're a bit difficult to get down now these days.
But I like that. I like the challenge. And looking at this gorgeous meadow, was this naturally contoured like this?
No, they weren't. We had piles of rubble and they were the sort of remains of the post-industrial site. And that posed a huge problem. First of all, we couldn't get down it, but also, what do I do with it? You know, I gave myself a mantra, nothing in, nothing out. I needed to be sustainable. So I knew topography was very good for wildflowers and diversity of plants and also diversity of creatures. So I used the spoil to make the slopes that you now see. But also the beauty of that low nutrient soil and that low nutrient building waste is that many of our wildflowers really thrive in poor nutrient and poor nitrogen conditions. And they're the wildflowers that our indigenous insects, caterpillars for butterflies, etc., really depend on for their larval food sources.
It's clearly working, Jo. I mean, it's looks fantastic, but knowing that it's thriving and really adding to the local biodiversity, it's amazing. Jo took the waste materials on site, not only to reconfigure the shape of the land, but to create diverse nooks and crannies where wildlife could thrive. Here, all the stone that was left has created this habitat wall, which is fantastic for newts and frogs, toads, even slow worms to be able to overwinter. And this beautiful herbarium is literally sitting in the crushed up concrete and sand that she found around the site. Perfect conditions, dry, free draining, and again gets the sun. Nothing goes to waste. And that's what we've got to take inspiration from. Having a look around our gardens, it may look like trash, but can we recycle it, upcycle it, let it become a habitat, maybe even a seat? Gardening this way is about a much bigger picture. With numbers of butterflies, moths and mammals having decreased in the last 50 years, Jo wanted to do her bit to redress the balance. She's sown over 100 varieties of wildflower to offer food and shelter. You've got such a huge variety of plants in here. Pick out a few for me that are your favourites.
Clover is one of my all-time favourites, and we've got two here. We've got the red clover, and we've got this little yellow thing here called black medic. They're really, really great food sources for bumblebees in particular and other solitary bees. And they also provide protein quite early on in the year for them to feed their grubs, so they're a super bee plant. But then you've got these other higher plants where you've got flatter areas, so on the daisy and also on the achilles, and those are great for butterflies to land on. There, you know, they're almost sort of calling out to be landed on.
Helipads.
Yeah, and then as you can see, it's thick, it's dense. We've got lots and lots of grasses in here, so you've got huge amounts of variety of canopy, and that can help disguise and provide shelter for all sorts of different things.
Jo, just orientate me, because from the pictures, where am I?
You are standing on the old railway line, and yeah, this was a real head-scratcher moment for me. Like, what do I do? It was covered in bramble, so
Okay.
I cut it down and covered it with black plastic for about 2 years. So
Wow.
yeah.
The long term again.
Yeah, again, one of those patience games. Yeah, so we've got a bit of a different kind of landscape of plants here, a bit of a different diversity, much more open. Can you see the ballasts here?
Yeah, here, there's a big patch.
And so you've sort of got more coastal plants like this Viper's bugloss really does very well here. Great for insects, but also I'm beginning to get orchids coming through, so
Wow.
really excited about that. Some mycorrhizae.
Shows there's
life.
a shift, there's a shift
There's a
coming.
shift.
All the hard work, it's paid off.
Yeah.
Jo has created this beautiful living garden, not just a garden to live in. And she's done that by gently peeling back the layers and has revealed pollution and waste material. But there was an ecology that needed to be saved. So what she's done is gently put in a matrix of planting right for the site, but it's also right for the environment. This place is teeming with biodiversity, not only good for nature, but good for her.
Well, this is not an industrial reclaim site, but actually it is an agricultural reclaim site, because underneath the herb garden here is solid stone. There's practically no soil in this bit at all, and I had to dig pits in order to plant the trees. And on this ground, where you get these Mediterranean herbs that have thrived in the drought that we've had, almost everything else has suffered, but these have loved it. We also are getting masses of insects and bees that just adore all the flowers. So you have herbs like the rosemary, the oregano, the fennel, all of these come from the Mediterranean. And they have evolved and adapted to very hot, dry conditions. So they are completely at home here. And we will cut them back. but not till the flowering is over. You may remember that one of the jobs I gave you, and I distinctly remember it was the 1st of April, was to cut back any sage bushes you had and cut them back hard, and I did these too. And they were just woody stubs. There was barely any sign of life at all, and look at them now. And that's one of the great things about these Mediterranean shrubby herbs, like rosemary or sage or thyme, is you can cut them back hard. And in fact, it's a good idea to do that because then you get nice soft growth, which is much better for cooking with. But you don't need a garden to grow herbs. Most herbs will grow really well in a container. Now, whilst practically any herb will grow in a pot, the easiest and the most robust and probably the most suitable, the way the weather is going, are Mediterranean herbs. And the key thing is not to overfeed them or indulge them. And you can see I've made a compost mix that is 50% grit. So we'll put that in the bottom, a layer like that. And I've got 3 herbs, and there's a range of Mediterranean ones, but I've got a prostrate rosemary, and I like prostrate rosemary for growing in pots because it will spill over the edge and it looks very decorative. So we'll take that out the pot, if we can. There we go. Now I need just a little bit more underneath there. And we'll put that right on the edge so it'll do its sprawly thing over the edge of the pot. And with it, I've got 2 different types of thyme. There's the ordinary thyme, which, as you can see, has got tiny leaves, is bushy, and what it hates more than anything else is shade. It needs to be in full sunshine. And I've got another thyme too. This is lemon thyme. Now, cooks love lemon thyme. Not very lemony, but there's a touch of it. And you can see the leaves are bigger. It's actually in flower. And it's a slightly more robust plant. So we put that in there like that and then just fill in around it. And these will grow to fill this pot. And as long as the soil is not too rich, they will remain hardy and tough. What you will find is that they will get leggy and a bit woody, and you have to keep cutting them back. So as long as you cut them back to get new, fresh growth, these will keep going for years. I'm going to top it up with some pure grit. So that gives us a Mediterranean little pot of herbs to go in a very sunny place that will take any amount of hot, dry weather that you can give it. Now, talking about blazing sun, we're going off to Florida now to visit one of your gardens.
Hello, Gardener's World. I'm Lainey, and I'm from Orlando, Florida, and I want to show you my garden. I've been gardening for about 4 years now, and what started as a vegetable garden to feed my family has quickly turned into a flower garden as well. Our springtime temperatures are reaching the mid-90s, and right now I've got eggplants, beans, and cucumbers coming. I'm growing a range of flowers like marigolds, cosmos, celosia, zinnias of all different colors, sizes, and shapes. There is one thing growing in my garden that I am most proud of this year, and they are my dahlias. I've got all different types, colors, sizes, petal shape. This Dr. John Kaiser was started as a tuber, and this one, that I don't know the name of, started from seed this year. And after watching many episodes of Gardener's World, I felt confident I could make more dahlias from cuttings. I struggled with growing dahlias in the past, but have done a lot of research and figured out that I can grow dahlias even in my hot climate. Thank you all for watching. I hope this encourages you to grow something that you thought you couldn't grow in your garden.
Well, I do agree with Lainey that it is always worth attempting to grow something, even if you're convinced it won't work for you, because For every rule that's made, there's a rule broken. And if it works, it doesn't matter how. But when you're growing dahlias, there is one thing I can tell you will definitely help, and that is to deadhead. And if you're not certain about when a flower is spent or when it's a bud, there is actually a rule that helps. You can see here, we have two side by side. You have a sort of rounded button, and that is a bud. Next to it is a spent flower, and it's distinctly cone-shaped. And actually, if you press it, very often liquid will come out. And when you deadhead, don't just take the flower head off, but go right down, follow the stem down until you come to a next leaf. Now that means that at the leaf, you'll get side shoots and you'll get two more flowers. You keep doing that and that will keep repeating. I suspect that all of us who love gardening and gardens can trace our interests back to a person or a moment, something that really lit a fire within us. And for Martin Fitton, that spark was ignited by one particular visit.
2009, I was on holiday. My mum and dad took us to a place called Compton Acres. We walked through the Japanese garden, and I walked through and I thought, wow, I want to create this at home. I've never seen a Japanese garden before. So to see something like the tea house in a garden, it's not like a garage or it's not like a normal garden structure. I wanted to go home straight away and start on it because it's something different to the typical English garden. I don't have any background in gardening or carpentry. I'm an aviation tanker driver. It can be very boring and lonely driving on motorways and stuff like that. But being creative in the workshop and in the garden is something that gives me a lot more pleasure because I've got something at the end of it I can be proud of that I've made. When I started my vision of a Japanese garden, I've created a little tea house, a miniature tea house, and in there is my filters for the pond, and they're all hidden away. Then opposite that, you've got a pavilion where you can view the garden. It's nice to sit there all weathers because we've got a roof over it, and I've got some shutters you can shut across the round windows. In Japan, at the entrance of a temple, you would often find a water basin, like this one I made. I made this out of a bin with concrete and put some pond sealer around the outside. It says on there, I just know enough. To enhance the area, I'm going to be putting bonsai trees around it. In this part of my garden is the Zen garden. The plants that I like the most are the acers, the pine trees. I like moss. I like when you see the effect of what the moss gives. So in this country, it's very difficult to grow moss. So I use a plant called Mind Your Own Business, and that grows really well in the garden and gives a really good effect. Many years ago, I'd seen the hazel corkscrew tree. I wanted one in my garden, so I managed to get hold of one. The corkscrew tree looks really good in the winter when there's no leaves on it. In the summer, it looks like a bush, and you can't see the wiggly branches going up through. So I wanted to create something where you can see through it and see the wiggly branches, which is a very good technique of the Japanese they do with cloud pruning. So at the end of it, you've got the leaves, and then you can see the branches. When you're sat here, you've got the koi, and then you've got the corkscrew at the back of the koi pond. It really suits it well. Now I've sort of come to the end of building my garden. oh, there's a lot more to do, but the structure of my garden. And now with the plants in the places I want it, and I've got more of an idea of how I want the garden to be in the future. And when I walk through my garden, it fills me with pleasure, happiness. Sometimes I go, wow, I just got to take a picture of it because I've created something different. And that gives me a sense of achievement. Everything you see is built by myself, and it puts a smile on my face.
Having visited Japan a number of times and knowing Japanese gardens well, the thing that I know Martin has got absolutely right is the craftsmanship, the attention to detail, and that mainlines into the tradition of Japanese gardening. There's a row here of foxgloves, which we sow from seed, pricked out into plugs, and then when they were big enough, planted in a few rows into the soil and have left for the last 2 months or so to grow into nice big plants. And these are biennials. And biennial life cycle is the seed germinates in late spring. Then you get a small plant that grows until it's fairly fully formed and has got a decent root system, then goes dormant from about the middle of October to the end of February, and then it's in a good place to grow fast, produce flowers, which will then set seed, and so the cycle continues. So these now have got a decent root system. You can see they've got good foliage, so they're ready to be transplanted to their final flowering position. And if I just lift them, starting at this end, there we go. A little bit of weeding. The roots will have established a bacterial and fungal relationship with the soil. So if I can take a bit of soil with it, that will help even though it's going in another part of the garden and the soil is roughly the same. You don't want to clear the soil off the roots before transplanting. So I will pop that in there, and now I can take that to plant out where I want them to flower. And still to come on today's programme, Rachel visits celebrity hairstylist Sam McKnight and discovers his love for colour.
When I see this sort of pastel colours, I remember a Chanel show we did with sugary pastel colours like this. All these colours here are such, and I'm taking pictures all the time, so we use them as in colour references all the time.
And we meet a gardener with a passion for growing anything edible, including a glorious array of heritage tomatoes.
I will take moments out of the day to just walk outside, and I'll go and walk around the greenhouse and just see what's coming ripe, and it's a moment of calm and a moment of peace.
And I shall be adding more plants to the sloping borders on the mound. But first, we visit the garden of one of our younger viewers.
Hello Gardener's World, my name's Sylvie, I'm 8. I live in Devizes in Wiltshire. I want to show you our greenhouse, which is made out of recycled windows. Our house used to have old drafty and cold sash windows, and when we had them replaced with new double glazed warm windows, we were left with all the old ones, which we thought would make a perfect greenhouse. So we dug foundations, we laid the windows out on the lawn, measured the walls, and put a roof on top. Papa likes wood turnings, so he made us some finials. Here's our greenhouse today. We have a grapevine in the corner that grows all over the roof. It makes yummy grape and apple juice later in the summer. We grow all different types of tomatoes. We also grow lots of basil. Perfect for homemade pizzas. We also have some houseplants in here. My favourite job is watering all the plants every day after school. And then I love lying in the hammock. I hope you enjoyed our greenhouse. Bye!
I think your greenhouse looks fantastic, Sylvie. And like you, I love homemade pizza with tomatoes from the greenhouse and basil. Delicious. Now I'm going to plant out the foxgloves that I dug up from the border where they had grown and developed into nice strong plants. And this is the rhythm with all biennials, is put them where you want them to grow. Anytime from now to October, they will get roots down in the ground and be ready to burst into action next spring. So I'm going to put them in here. The ground is as dry as bone, but I will water them in well and hopefully they will be happy. This is the border that I widened at the beginning of this year. You see, look at that, it's just dust. Goodness me. So I'll give it a really good soak. So I'll take one out, trying to keep as much root as possible. There we go. Pop that in there. I'm going to water that in before I backfill it, which means that the water will get under the roots as well as around them on top, because otherwise this very dry soil will act like a sponge and just soak it up before it gets down in the ground. So we'll just put some water in the hole, like that. Let that soak in, and then backfill around it. And then put more water on top. Now, there is one burning question I know you're all asking. Does your hair influence your garden, or your garden influence your hair? Well, last summer, Rachel went to visit a man who certainly knows the answer.
You might not know Sam McKnight, but you'll certainly recognise his clients. He's a renowned hairstylist for Glossy magazine photo shoots and catwalk shows, known for his work with Kate Moss, Tilda Swinton and Diana, Princess of Wales. Constantly travelling the world, this city garden has become his place of sanctuary. So where has the inspiration come from for all of this? How did it start?
I never really had a desire to have my own garden until about early 2000s, when I used to live not too far from Regent's Park. And I used to spend a lot of sunny afternoons renting a deck chair, reading a book in the Queen Mary Rose Garden. So that started me thinking about maybe getting an outside space of my own, because I'd always lived in a block of flats before. I somehow found myself visiting Sissinghurst. I think we may have done a shoot there or something, and I got absolutely blown away by that. And then discovered Great Dixter, then discovered Hidcote, then discovered all the sort of great gardens, and then started to be really curious about their planting, especially Dixter with its organised chaos, which I like to call it, which is very similar to my work, actually. So the connection was there from the beginning, really.
After finding this garden and its house, Sam set about creating his colour-filled dream garden. It has a figure-of-8 structure, bordered by narrow, tree-lined paths. The first loop has borders and beds packed with billowing, bright perennials and shrubs. Hidden by a quince tree is the second loop, filled with bold and delicious dahlias and some very traditional roses. And it's the flowers and colour that seems to have driven the evolution of this garden.
This is definitely me in plant form, and it gets more and more me as the seasons go on.
It seems to me that you're a flower man. You know, some people are very much inspired by the foliage, but for me it seems like the flowers really are the stars for you. and those are the things that catch your eye. Would that be right?
The flowers, the shape and the colour, I mean, look at that. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Oh,
it's
so
fantastic.
beautiful.
It's
Yes.
about having that colour.
That's what speaks to you.
That's what shouts at me, and that's what I respond to.
It's just gorgeous, you know, the verbena through the dahlias, through the cosmos, I mean, and the zinnias, everything just fits together without looking contrived.
Sam wants colour all year round. Zingy pots frame the front of the garden, leading to waves of softer shades. And I suspect his skill at blending colours and shapes speaks to his years crafting extravagant, colourful hairstyles.
How much would you say that the garden and the plants that you put into it are inspired by the work that you do?
Oh, quite a lot. I mean, an awful lot. And when I see this sort of pastel colours, I remember a Chanel show we did with sugary pastel colours like this. All these colours here are such, and I'm taking pictures all the time, so we use them as in colour references all the time.
I have a 16-year-old at the moment with them who's using every colour in the book. So she's going from mauve to pink to
absolutely.
dark blue.
And a mix of all those colours, you know, not just, it's never, because it's never, if you look at that, it's not just one colour. It's slightly tinted brown on the edges, and it goes from a grey to a lilac to quite a deep purple. There's never just one colour, and hair is like that too. There's a depth to everything.
The symbiotic relationship between Sam's work and his gardening has led to some colourful plant choices further into the garden.
Look at that dahlia.
Beautiful.
That's a stunner.
Yeah, she's called Myrtle's Folly. Look at the size of that on my hand.
I'm coveting that rather.
Yeah.
Might go on my list at home. Beautiful. And then just so many lovely dahlias as you go around this section. Do you have favourites, or do they sort of come and go in your affections?
I think for me, there's a mixture of the sort of bold and blousy and the Technicolor and the really sort of structured pom-pom dahlias like that.
That's beautiful.
So I think having the mixture is really good. And I always shove a few sunflowers in there. And this year I've got a mix between Velvet Queen and Black Magic, because there's something really rich and romantic about the dark ones.
Yes.
What is so beautiful about Sam's garden is that it is uniquely him.
We're just a couple of miles from the centre of London, and yet you feel like you're in a really rural, sort of very calming environment. It's beautiful. And the other thing is his eye for colour, which I think is second to none. You can see here just the way that he groups these colours together. They're not necessarily things that you would think might go together. And texture as well here. Look at this froth of cosmos foliage with the verbenas, the dahlias, everything else just popping up through. And in fact, if he was inspired by Dijkstra, I think this is where it really shows in these ranks of pots just either side of the terrace here. You get the sense that nothing escapes him. He sees every single detail, and it shows. What would you say that you were aiming for with the garden in terms of how people might respond to it?
Well, because it's such a meditative place for me, I hope it's really peaceful, which I think it is. And everyone who comes here, it brings them great joy. And I think joy is a word I use all the time because it's just joyful. I want it to be joyful. I want it to feel joyful. And I think that's probably the word I would use. Joy, pure and simple.
I agree. I think that's spot on. I do feel peaceful, and it's brought me enormous joy visiting.
Thank you.
Well, I think if you can create joy for yourself and everybody who comes to your garden, that is the definition of a good gardener. There's nothing more really you can achieve than that. This part of Longmeadow is work in progress. I am getting joy from it. I'm enjoying the process, but there is work to do. The mound has had a lot of changes over the years, and the latest one started a year ago when we stripped off the turf off these banks to plant them up. And so far, it's fine. I'm perfectly happy, but you can see that there are bare spaces, which is inevitable. The shrubs that we planted are really quite small, and they will grow and the whole balance will change. So I've infilled with more annuals, and that's always a good tip. When you're starting a border, either grow from seed or buy in plugs, lots of annuals, and they will fill the border in year 1, perhaps to a certain extent year 2, while everything else gets established. But I've got a couple more shrubs. A blue one, the Perovskia, the Russian sage, which has got this lovely glaucous foliage and these spires of delicate blue flowers, and a yellow one, the Hypericum higcote, which has got fairly strong yellow flowers, not necessarily as soft as I'd like, but it's a really good doer for any hot, dry, free-draining places. And I need that sort of bulk in which to set the rest of the planting against. And now I was thinking of putting it around the corner here, maybe like that. So that will spill out over the edge. If I then take a Perovskia, never really been able to grow this in our normal beds because it needs such good drainage. But on the slope, I reckon something like that should be good. I've got another one. I'm going to have 2 either side. Maybe, what's that look like there? As ever, place everything before you plant anything. That way you can move them around and get the balance right. It is important when you're establishing a border to work out where you see it from. Now, that may sound obvious, but when you have 2 fairly symmetrical borders either side of a central steps, you might think that you look at it front on, and then you plan it like that and behave accordingly. But in fact, I see this border walking up this path and down this path. So all the time I'm looking at it lengthways and hardly ever front on. And I should adjust the planting to reflect that, rather than some notional idea of what it should look like. Now, however drought resistant a plant is, however much it likes good drainage, it will need watering in when you plant it and watering it in well. We're now going to visit another of your gardens, and I think it's fair to say that this one belongs to a local horticultural hero.
My name's Patrick. Welcome to my garden. I'm just going to walk around now and check all my plants, because I haven't seen them for a while, because I've been busy with my sister. So I'm just going to walk around and look at my dahlias at the moment, which are coming on very nicely, and my trailing begonias. And I've got quite a mixture of plants here. I've got a tree fuchsia that I've had for quite many years, and for the last 2 years it hasn't flowered. And I've got some advice, and they said you ought to change the pot and put it in a bigger pot, which I have done. It didn't flower last year, unfortunately. I'm hoping, and I talked to my plant, so I'm hoping it's going to flower this year. It's a little bit early at the moment. But anyway, I'll keep my fingers crossed. And then I've got various other shrubs, camellias and astromeras and all different shrubs, lavenders, you name it. I think I've got it here. Over 100 pot plants to look after and tend to. It keeps me out of mischief anyway, so I'm quite pleased with it. And as we all know, it's therapeutic to be in the garden doing these things, and you know, it's very nice just to be here. I come lots of times down here and just sit here in the afternoon and have a nice cup of tea and enjoy my plants. So really, that's about it. It's just very nice to be here. Anyway, thank you for listening, and bye for now.
Patrick, you say you're quite pleased with what you've done. I think you should be very, very pleased and very proud. Looks great. Right, let's get this last one in, and then this is done. Now, there's a big gap here, and obviously I need to add more plants to it, but Hypericum will fill that gap, actually. They do grow sort of about a metre or so high and a metre or so wide, so I needn't be too worried, but as I said earlier, just some annuals perhaps will take their place. And of course we put bulbs underneath here to try and get as long a display as possible. Now, it's interesting that gardeners after a while tend to veer towards either growing vegetables and fruit and edible plants or towards the more decorative side. And traditionally they haven't overlapped hugely. But increasingly young gardeners are ignoring those boundaries. And we went to visit Lucy Hutchings in her garden in Suffolk. And Lucy is one of those gardeners that sees beauty in every kind of edible plant, and not just beauty, but also the well-being that they bring to her.
The garden is a real haven for me. I was going through a really stressful period and I just needed something that was a complete distraction and totally removed from what was going on. I needed something just to make me happy and in a really uncomplicated way. I will take moments out of the day to just walk outside, and I'll go and walk around the greenhouse and just see what's coming ripe, and it's a moment of calm and a moment of peace. Everything that I grow, I want to be able to harvest one way or another, but I also want a really, really beautiful garden, and I think that's what a lot of people feel. You don't have to choose, you can have absolutely the best of both worlds. There's a really diverse mix of different edibles in the garden. I've found a way to use as much space as humanly possible. Got your kind of classic veg, beans and cucumbers and that kind of thing, all the way through to some more unusual stuff. I have a relatively large papaya in one of the greenhouses, which was grown from seed this year and seems to be thriving. My favourite plant to grow has always been and remains tomatoes. I just love them. As plants, they give me a lot of reward. And for me, they're like little objects of art. An absolute rainbow of jewel-like colours, and they're so beautiful to grow. But also, from a production point of view, I can realistically grow all the tomatoes that we need as a family for the whole year in my greenhouse, which I think is really lovely to be able to do. I would probably have to admit that I am slightly obsessed by tomatoes, but that's fine, I can admit my faults. Okay, this is one of my all-time favourite heirlooms, and it's fantastic. It's called Ananas Noir, or black pineapple if you prefer the English, but you'll usually find it with the French name. And it's just a really fantastic all-round heirloom. This one really gets exciting when you slice into the middle. So it should have a really spectacular set of colours going on. Okay, so there we go. If you can see, there's this amazing psychedelic, almost tie-dye effect in the middle, which is so striking. It's a fantastic slicing tomato. And they're super juicy. It's all over my hands. And the smell is amazing. For me, the perfect tomato has a balance of sharp and sweet. I like to have a bit of both. You've got that little bit of acid that keeps it interesting and like tingles on the tongue, but then it ends on something really sweet, and then you've got fruitiness and a little bit of earthiness. I love this tomato. It's one of my favourites. So this tomato is called striped stuffer, and it's a red tomato, and you can see it's got like speckled yellow stripes down it, and it's usually quite relatively large and heavily ribbed. If you like cooking with tomatoes, this one does something really different, and that's why I like it. So you should be able to cut off the top, just like that, and then you can see that it's hollow inside. You can see the gaps. This central section where the seeds are grows in a relatively tight ball, so you should be able to scoop that whole middle part out in one go. And then you've got a lovely hollow tomato ready to stuff, and then you should be able to just pop the top back on and roast. I've tried a lot of methods of supporting tomatoes over the seasons and hadn't quite found one that worked really well, especially supporting a really big tomato like this mushroom basket one here. I had a eureka moment at the beginning of the season and thought bungee cords, they're absolutely perfect. They've got a hook bottom and top, so they're really easy to attach on, and they're nice and strong, and it's easy to wind the elastic around the tomato plant as it grows. It's worked really well. I've even got them going across the roof in some of them. So rather than having to stop the tomatoes when they hit the apex of the roof, I can then keep winding them across the top of the roof and keep them going. So I've got really, really tall tomatoes. They really support them as they're hanging down. So I'm completely converted now. It's bungee cords all the way for me. Tomatoes are a big part of what I grow, but I grow a huge amount of other edibles as well, all through the rest of the garden. So, like a lot of people, I have not had the luxury of a massive garden, but I have absolutely zero self-control and I want to grow everything. You do not necessarily want to have to choose between having a beautiful garden and having a really productive one. I've got 10 squash plants on this tunnel in a really, really small footprint, and it's allowed me to plant loads and loads of stuff around them as well and really make the most of space. Then you've got something that's really doing both the edible and the ornamental job really, really well. I've got some massive tromboncinos just on the end of it there. Everything's all interplanted, and the effect is really, really beautiful. I bring colour in with edible flowers like these physalis and peppers and sunflowers. This is peppermint chard. The name has nothing to do with the flavour. It doesn't taste minty. It's named because of these neon pink stems that look like candy canes. It gets so big and will reliably produce greens for a good year or so. My garden is a huge source of pride and joy for me. It's important for me to show just how beautiful edible plants can be. And I feel really privileged that I get to share that with people and hopefully inspire them a little bit about just how much is possible with edible planting and edible growing and different ways to make the most of the space that they've got.
That's it, bring it in. There's a good girl. Now, Nellie, given that you are a star,
would you like a star? Would you like a star for yourself? You have to sit down. There you go. Good girl.
I can't begin to match the range of tomatoes that Lucy's growing, but I've got a few different varieties. And actually, I'm growing rather less this year than last year because we had a glut. And with tomatoes, obviously you want to pick them when they're ripe and eat them as soon as possible. Most of the tomatoes that you buy will have been picked not fully ripe, with a nice hard skin, so they transport well, but that means they never develop their full taste. Now here you can see, obviously, the green ones are not ripe, the orange ones are ripening, and this red one might well be ripe. And I'll test that simply, will it come away in my hand? And the answer is yes, really easily. So that's perfect. That has got a lovely soft flesh. And I always feel that with a tomato, it should almost feel like a red bag filled with that sort of acidic sweetness of the juice and the pulp and the seeds. It shouldn't be a hard red thing that you almost feel you can bounce like a ball. And when you grow them yourself, that's the joy of being able to harvest them when they're ripe. Beautiful. Now, as well as tomatoes, I've got chilies growing in here, and the chilies are beginning to ripen too. And chilies share the same sort of conditions as tomatoes, but what I've learned over the years is they just need maximum light. That's the key thing, and as much heat as you can give them. So they're always going to do better in a greenhouse or on a windowsill. But if it is a windowsill, south-facing, the brightest one you can give them, which is why I've put them in the middle of the greenhouse on the basis that they should get the most light. It's important to pick chilies as and when they ripen, because once they're ripe, they will inhibit the production of flowers on the rest of the plant. So if you want to keep the production going, keep harvesting them, even though the plant looks lovely when it's festooned with bright red chilies. So that not only will give me the heat of a chili, but also because it's ripe, that touch of fruitiness, which is really important. Right, I will go through these and pick a selection, some of which I'll keep and some of which I'll freeze. But while I'm doing that, here's some jobs for you this weekend. Now is the time to sow parsley to give you a supply of fresh leaves right throughout the winter. Sprinkle the seed thinly on a seed tray full of compost. Cover the seeds over and then water them. And you can either do this from above or sit them in a tray of water for about half an hour, which will then slowly moisten the compost. Put them somewhere warm, and in about 2 or 3 weeks' time, they should be ready to prick out. Buddleia is in full bloom at the moment, but the flowers fade quickly and don't look so good. So if you remove these faded ones, it will encourage side shoots which will carry a fresh display well into September. By this stage of summer, almost every container will have used up all the available nutrients in its compost, so needs a weekly feed. I like to use liquid seaweed, but homemade comfrey feed is equally as good. Keep this regime up for the rest of the summer, and you will keep the display looking superb. Well, that's it for today. Time to take the dogs for a walk. But I'll see you back here at Longmeadow at 9:30 next Friday. So until then, bye-bye. Okay. Go on then. Go on. Off you go.